Anthropologists estimate that on average, over the last 5,000 years, during any 100-year period, there have been 96 of those years where human beings have been at war with one another somewhere in the world. And despite this, across the centuries, Peter whispers to us, "Do not fear what they fear, and do not be intimidated, but in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting of the hope that is within you." So how will we defend our hope in this violent and broken world? A few people have asked me why we read Caroline Alexander's translation of the Iliad yesterday. For 12 hours, we read the entire thing, and it was an amazing day. It's a text that was written by Homer. It was one of the first texts that was written in phonetic Greek. It's the beginning of our literary tradition. It was written sometime between the years 750 and 700 BC, and it is about events that happened many years earlier in the year 1250 during the Trojan War. The Iliad, there's many things that we know about the Trojan War that the Iliad doesn't dwell on. It doesn't dwell on the seduction or abduction of Helen, who started the war, or what started the war. It doesn't tell the story of how the Greek military hid in the wooden horse that was drawn into the gates of Troy. It doesn't tell about how the city was sacked and destroyed. Instead, Homer writes about 2 weeks during a siege of 10 years, at the very end of the 10 years. And it's a period when everyone who's involved in this war wants it to end. No one wants to fight anymore, and yet the force of war continues. So why does the war persist? For 3 reasons: pride, fate, and fury. So Achilles, the greatest warrior of all, his mother is the goddess Thetis of the sea. He refuses to fight after his slave girl Briseis is taken by his inept, whining commander, Agamemnon. Agamemnon, I love what Caroline said this morning about him. She said he's entirely driven by selfish, materialist forces. He's constantly complaining. He says, "Do you intend, while you yourself have a prize, that I should sit here without one?" I mean, that childishness, that smallness is something that's so clear and obvious to us even after all these centuries have passed. If his embarrassing conflicts and comparisons about status had been avoided, the war would have come to an end easily and they would have won. Again, later in the epic, the war comes so close to it being concluded. They decide that no one wants the war to happen anymore, so they decided it's going to be determined by a duel between Paris and Menelaus, the 2 people who are most involved in the war effort. And just as they're fighting, and just as it seems like Menelaus is going to beat Paris, the goddess Aphrodite whisks Paris away, and they're saved. But the problem is that the fighting resumes. There's no way to resolve it. Fate expressed by the god's intervention seems to make the conflict last on and on intractably. And finally, Achilles, he's someone who does not at all respect his commander, Agamemnon, and he questions the very reason for fighting. It reminds me of the boxer Muhammad Ali. Do you remember when the reporter asked him why he isn't signing up to go fight in Vietnam? And he said that the Vietnamese haven't done anything to me. It's people in my own country who've treated me like I'm less than human. Achilles says the same thing. He says, the Trojan spearmen, they have done nothing to me. He knows that he will be killed if he goes to war. But then he gets drawn into the battle when his dear friend Patroclus is killed and he's filled with rage. Similarly, his adversary Hector's father is the king, and the king knows that it's going to lead to the death of his grandchildren. His daughter is going to be sold to slavery. He himself is going to be killed at the gates of Troy, and his father is pleading with him pleading with him. He says, please come back inside the wall, my child. Take pity on me. So both Achilles and Hector, they both know they're going to be killed if they go to battle. They understand that the war is not worth their lives and that there is something in them that makes them persist. Wrath, anger, is the first word in this ancient epic. And it is foolish pride, capricious chance, and pure anger that drives the war forward. Now, really, it's a remarkable thing, isn't it? That this poem uses the conventions of heroic epic to undermine the very idea that wars should be fought at all. And it raises universal questions that are still with us today. Are there any conditions under which a warrior is justified in defying his commander? How do wars start? And why do they continue even when all the combatants want them to end? Can giving one's life for one's country sometimes be a betrayal of one's family? Is dying gloriously and being remembered worth it? In the poem, Achilles says, I wish that strife would vanish away from among gods and mortals, and gall, which makes a man grow angry for all his great mind. That gall of anger that swarms like smoke inside of a man's heart and becomes a thing sweeter to him by far than dripping honey. He does a great job of describing the way that we fall in love with our own anger, our own righteous indignation. So why did we gather yesterday to read these ancient lines? We read them deep into the night because we want to deepen the connection we have with one another and to all humans throughout history. We want to remember the power that war has on the human heart. And we tried to honestly face the pride, pettiness, accident, and anger that prevent us from living at peace with each other in this beautiful world that surrounds us. So you may be sitting there and wondering, well, what the heck does this have to do with the way of Jesus? But the challenge that I outlined to you is the exact challenge that Apostle Paul had when he escaped from a mob in Thessalonica and comes and arrives in Athens. He debates Epicurean philosophers and Stoic philosophers. These are two Greek schools of thought concerned about how we should live. He meets people, and I love this line from Acts, who, quote, would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. And he gives an accounting for the hope that is within him. So I'm going to you're paying attention, so I'm very briefly going to explain Epicureanism and Stoicism. Very, very briefly. This isn't the high point of the series. This is a detour, but we'll be back on the main road in a minute. So Epicurus moved to Athens in the year 341 BC. And Epicurean philosophers believed that the goal of human life is happiness. It's avoidance of physical pain. It's peace of mind. And they thought that the fear of death and anxiety about punishment, these are the primary causes of the anxiety that makes us miserable, that distort our inner life and give rise to irrational desires. They believe that we can become happy by how we channel our thought, thinking not about politics or religion or about sex or about marriage, but about friendship with one another. Stoicism also arrived not that long after, in the year 300 BC. And the Stoics offered a much more theological approach, a much more developed picture of God as a physical entity. For them, God is eternal reason, the intelligence which brings forth creation, the force of life that animates all things. So this God is not like the unpredictable, capricious Greek gods, but orderly, rational, and providential. So on the Areopagus, that means literally the hill dedicated to Mars, Ares, the god of war, Ares Opagus, Paul addresses Stoics and Epicureans and followers of Homer and everyone else. And he says, I was walking around your city and I saw a shrine to the unknown God. And what is unknown to you, let me declare to you. And he explains to them that God is not an idol or a physical object in the world. God creates, and also, this isn't hard for us, isn't it? That God sets limits to everything. Our existence, our breath, the space we take up, everything we have comes from God. And yet, this is so important. Paul says that God is personal. We have a longing for God. And so we search, and perhaps we even find God, because God is not far from each of us. That's what Paul says. God is not far from each of us. And on this Mother's Day, we also hear the story about how Jesus mothers his closest friends to the very end. You may have had a great mother, or you may have had a terrible mother, but Jesus loves and cares and adores and prepares his friends for what life is going to be like after his death. And he teaches exactly this, that our relation to God is a personal one. Jesus exclaims, "I will not leave you orphaned, isolated by yourself, but the Paraclete, the advocate," that is the Greek word for the one who walks along with you, that will be the Spirit of truth. And the Spirit of truth will never abandon you. And Jesus says, "You will be in me, and I will be in you. And the presence of God will help you to keep God's commandments." Now, this is an important thing for you all to realize, all of us to realize, that it's not like we do something good and then God rewards us by intimacy with his presence. Instead, God gives us God's self first. And in the intimacy of that life, we're able to accomplish far greater things than we would ever imagine. The genius of Christianity is that it recognizes that pride, competition, fury, and pettiness, these put us in impossible conflicts, but that God sustains us even through the worst forms of human suffering. In fact, the suffering of God helps us to make our own pain bearable. Now, this week I just had an amazing experience. I was with a friend who was basically writing his own memoirs. And so he was reading a section of his memoirs to a group of us. And he described this story from his life. He was in the 70s. In the 1970s, he had a boy who was age 5 and a wife. And the three of them went to the movies in Southern California. And they drove into the city to see the movies. And he was walking around outside the movies with his son, kind of waiting while his wife was waiting in line. And he saw a phone booth. And in the phone booth, there was a big telephone directory hanging by a chain, kind of swinging back and forth. And when he saw it, he knew that he wanted to call and get in touch with some friends from his childhood. This was the other family that lived in the same duplex as he and his mom did back in Philadelphia. And so he begins to describe what that life was like in Philadelphia. That the neighbors seemed to have everything. They had a television, they had a car, they had a dad who was around when his father was far away. And so there was a kind of conflict between the two boys living in the same duplex in different units in the same duplex. And one day, my friend got the sense that his neighbor had told the teacher that during recess, he had been using bad language. And so he got in trouble from the teacher, and he was looking for a chance for revenge. And when he came home that day, the neighbor was playing stickball on the street, and he saw the neighbor's book bag right there on the porch. And so he took that book bag, and he went many blocks over, and he threw the book bag away into the backyard of some house. And he remembers that night, the boy's mother beat him really badly. He remembers hearing him cry and not doing anything about it. And then we hear about what happened to that boy when the boy grew up. The boy went to Vietnam and was suffering there. He developed drug addictions. He had a hard time getting his career going. And so he didn't know what happened, but he knew that he wanted to get back in touch with the family. And so he met with the boy's family, and the mother, when the boy met him, when my friend met him, the mother said, "I always thought that you would grow up to be a murderer." Yes, a murderer. I mean, he was just like, oh my gosh, these people knew what I was about it. And he was so proud because he grew up to be a university professor instead. I guess it's kind of like a murderer in some ways. And so he decided that he was going to call that old friend. And so they have this like small talk. And finally, the friend on the other side of the line, he says, listen, I know, I mean, if you're not going to apologize to me, there's just no point in us talking anymore. And he hung up, and that was it. That's the last time that the two ever spoke. And I know that even though this friend of mine seems to show no remorse, all of us standing in this room knows that he's still thinking about these events that happened so long ago. That the real question is not whether we're successful in our careers. The real question is, how are we going to live with each other and live with our past? The epic is not a battle of warfare on the fields outside of the besieged Troy. The true struggle is for all of us to live together in peace, to know how to care for each other, to know how to work out problems once they arise. In the Iliad's world, all we have is our ego, and it is in competition with every other ego, and there is nothing to temper our fury. The bickering and unreliable gods of the Epicureans, the nameless impersonal power of the Stoics, they cannot help us. But my friends, every person you meet, everyone shines with the beauty of God's light. And every week we come here to learn a little bit more about how to nourish the hope that is in us. This is the hope that we can seek and find God. That God is nearer to us than we are to ourselves. That through the turmoil and enmity of this world, God is directing us. God is loving us. God is mothering us. Do not fear what they fear, and do not be intimidated. But in your hearts, sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is within you.